Good evening and aloha everyone. So glad that you could join us tonight. It's Tuesday night. It's time for Tuning Up with Iggy and Dave, and we're so happy to be back after a few weeks off to talk about the Starlight series, so successful. Our big finale this week. We are welcoming back to Hawaii our beloved, illustrious artistic advisor, JoAnn Falletta. But first of all, Dave, you've been very busy as usual. Just because we don't see you on camera or on stage doesn't mean you're taking any time off.
No, but I did leave Oahu for the first time since we've had our last show. So I went to the Big Island, and it was marvelous, and I continued to learn so much about this community, and it was really fun to meet people that kept saying, bring the symphony to the Big Island. We want to come, we want the symphony here. And so now that we've tackled 8 weeks at the Waikiki Shell, and we're going to launch next season, now we can set our sights further out on the neighbor islands here.
That's right.
And get back to
I love the Big Island. I used to go there every summer. You know, all parts of the Big Island, Hilo, Waimea.
Yeah, I met a few people who asked me about Iggy, so he's known outside of Oahu.
So as you know, Hawaii has much different climates and landscape. Anything that comes to mind when you went to the Big Island that was different than Honolulu and Oahu?
For me, that I didn't realize how much I missed driving. This is like a very mainland thing to say, but like to get in the car and to drive for 90 minutes, 2 hours, 3 hours, like I could just keep going. And the terrain to see, you know, that drive from the top of Volcano down to inside the park, down to the water, you know, it's just so beautiful. It's just absolutely stunning and inspiring and all of those things for us to.
Were you able to, were the fires around you when you were there?
Yeah, so we had to adjust our schedule a little bit because of the fires on the northwest side of the island. We had driven into Waimea on Saturday and seen the fire and didn't realize how big it was and had lunch in town there. Yeah, glad that is under control and that devastation has paused momentarily.
So today we have, for the first time, our executive director and our artistic advisor on the same stage. Is this the first time you're actually meeting in person today or this weekend?
Not really the first time, but the first time in our roles here. Dave actually played viola with the Buffalo Philharmonic for 2 or 3 weeks, so that's wonderful.
Surprise! Surprise!
But it is great to be able to come and see him in Hawaii.
So obviously, the two of you have been in touch quite a bit these last, I guess, since March of 2020, or when Dave started to.
That's right.
To
That's
work.
right.
Any impressions you have of Dave, JoAnn?
I think we are the luckiest orchestra in the world, I have to say, Iggy, because Dave came, he had one auspicious week where everything seemed to be okay, and then he was confronted with some of the biggest challenges ever, not only in our orchestra world, but in the world. And he has navigated that and gotten us through that and gotten us to a point where we are really in a good situation. So I have been singing his praises everywhere, and I'm just so grateful to be able to be a colleague, Dave. It's tremendous what you've done.
Thank you.
I hate to put the two of you on the spot, but executive director and artistic advisor or music director, the dynamic is very important. Historically speaking, it goes very well, but many famous orchestras on the mainland have a very interesting dynamic between those two very important positions. Is it because those two positions are usually held by people with obviously great skills, but also big egos? Or
You know, I have to say though, Iggy, yes, I mean, you're probably right about all of that, but Dave and I seem to be seemed to establish a sort of a Zoom friendship right
Sure.
away, and we tend to agree about a lot of things.
Yeah.
And you know, it's been really a great privilege to work with him.
Dave?
Yeah, you know, I echo everything that JoAnn has said and your remark about egos. But I think that, you know, where I feel that we align most is that having the artists and the community at the center of all the conversations that we're having are the priorities for us as an organization. And, you know, there's a lot of conversation to be had within those two things, but if we keep the music and the mission and the people really at the core of everything we do, everything else just kind of falls in line, you know?
That's right.
Yeah.
And I guess it's the same with the musicians and the orchestra. Once we start playing, then everything makes sense. So JoAnn, you're gonna conduct the orchestra this week. Anything you're looking forward to? This is gonna be the first time for you to conduct outdoors at the
That's
Waikiki
right.
Shell.
That's right.
It's been a while. You know, of course, we had to delay your visit.
Yeah.
But how do you feel about coming back to conduct the Hawaii Symphony Orchestra?
I'm so happy, Iggy. I'm so happy to be back. And you know, I want to tell you that I watched all of the streamed concerts, and I thought they were superb. I mean, they looked so beautiful on the stage, and the music was wonderful. It gave me lots of ideas for concerts I had to do in Buffalo from the pieces you chose. And Dave's presentation of the material and the program overview at the beginning, I thought they were superb. And so I felt close to the orchestra watching all of those. And I'm so happy to be back. And yes, I've never conducted at the famous Shell. After all of the years that we talked about, wouldn't it be great if we could get back to play at the Shell? And now we are.
That's right. And we'll get into it a little bit later about how the two of you have managed to create a unique brand of the Hawaii Symphony Orchestra for Hawaii. We'll get to that in just a moment. But Dave, about this weekend's program, how did that come about? And our guest artist, Lisa Nakamichi.
Sure. A guest on Tuning Up, boy, back in December it must have been when Lisa was in town. Well, this is Starlight number 8, the Sheraton Starlight finale. We've made it through 7 tremendous weeks of performances, kind of culminating with these last 2 weeks in August here. Friday and Saturday, we had the music of Led Zeppelin and Queen, and the rocks continue here to our last week of performances, Rachmaninoff. Every marketer's dream. Symphony that rocks, Maninoff. So the programming, I think, is very much in line with what we've done the rest of the summer. You know, we have Michael Thomas Fumai joining us for not 1 but 2 pieces this week. We have a surprise world premiere on the performances this weekend that Michael wrote that is in honor of one of our tremendous sponsors, our tremendous donors that actually made possible the entire Michael Thomas Fumai series. So we're excited to debut that. But, you know, this past year we've had to do so many small pieces of repertoire in length and in size, and the Rachmaninoff is neither.
That's true.
So we're going out with force here at the end of the summer. And I think it really embodies the excitement that we all have for the future of the symphony here. Not only have we made it through 8 weeks of tremendous performances with in-person audiences, but we've also set ourselves up for a really successful coming season here that's adaptable no matter what the circumstances are here locally in our community. And I think it remains reflective of this community by having someone like Lisa Nakamichi, who's of Hawaii here, soloing on the Gershwin, and being able to feature our orchestra musicians. There's a lot of great orchestral solos that happen in the Gershwin and the Rachmaninoff. And then, again, to feature Michael Thomas Fumai, a composer who's of Hawaii.
Looking back at those last weeks of the Starlight series, did you, in your mind, before we got started, back in May or June, think this is how it's going to happen, and this is how it happened, or were the bumps on the road, or did everything go smoothly, or
Of course.
in hindsight, Dave?
I had a moment. I think it was definitely Saturday evening, standing next to our board chair, Paul Kosasa, both screaming, "We are the champions," at the end of the Queen performance, where, I finally, I think for the first time, kind of relaxed a little bit, that like we had actually arrived at something. We had more people in attendance at the Waikiki Shell than fit inside the Blaisdell. We did it with safety, we did it with social distancing, physical distancing, and we brought a community back together through music. And albeit it's a very different community than perhaps we usually see at a Masterworks performance, but I think that that's one of the great things our symphony does, is that we can relate to so many parts of this community. We're so adaptable. The musicians are so talented, and this community is so accepting of the orchestra, that there was Saturday evening at the end of that show. There were more bumps than we can count. There's been more meetings than I wish to disclose to get through all those bumps, but we did it as a community, and I'm tremendously proud of the organization that we were able to get through, and not just get through, but really succeed in our mission. Yeah.
And everyone comes out a champion. Michael Fumai, JoAnn, maybe you can tell us a little bit about what we can expect. Were you able to kind of communicate with Michael as far as this week's program and his pieces?
I was, and he's been very, very helpful, and he's also very excited, as I am. And it is unusual to have the chance to do two pieces of a living young composer. One was that surprise that Dave mentioned, a fanfare written in honor of our sponsor. So I'm delighted. I'm delighted. And the music is very communicative. It's filled with color, filled with drama. And I think the audience loves that. And I think it's going to be a great success. And I can't wait.
Yes, as everyone knows, I've known Michael for a long time, and a wonderful violinist and composer, and I've seen him grow over the ages, and just to see his music being performed by the Hawaii Symphony Orchestra,
Yeah.
and other so many fantastic orchestras around the world, it's just it's so great for Hawaii. You have yet to perform with Lisa Nakamichi, am I correct? Or have you done before?
We did some Mozart together.
Mozart,
it was
okay.
a while ago, and it was a wonderful opportunity. And of course, I've seen Lisa at so many of our events and our concerts. Not only is she a spectacular musician, she's a friend of ours. I mean, she's part of our family in the Hawaii Symphony. And so this coming together on the stage means a lot to me, to be able to work with an artist like Lisa who cares about our orchestra, and to celebrate with Rhapsody in Blue, I mean, which is a big favorite of almost everyone. So, and as Dave mentioned, lots of solos for our orchestra, and lots of great brass playing, and of course the piece itself is really appealing.
This sort of takes a unique place in the classical music repertoire, because I believe, didn't Gershwin maybe later wrote an actual piano concerto where he was more according to the format of an orchestra, but this is sort of neither a standard format nor a completely unique jazz, or what place does this take?
This piece is like a groundbreaking piece, though, Iggy, because it happened in 1924. It seems that Paul Whiteman, without really clearing this with Gershwin, said in the newspaper that Gershwin was about to write a piece. They would hear the world premiere of a piece that blended classical and jazz. Okay. Gershwin only found out because he was reading the newspaper, and this was like in January, and he called Paul Whiteman and said, "I didn't know this." He said, "Well, you better start working. It's in February." So he had to write very quickly, and in fact, he wrote it first for the Paul Whiteman band to accompany. So it was a piece for piano and kind of band,
jazz band,
and it was such an enormous success. It was premiered on February 11th, and people said that that was the day that they will always remember as the emancipation of jazz. Jazz was accepted as an art form on the level of classical music. So it was a major accomplishment. Later on, they redid the orchestral part for a full orchestra, and that's what we're playing.
My understanding is Gershwin a son of Jewish Russian immigrants,
Right.
but how, I'm assuming that there wasn't too much jazz in Russia. How did Gershwin become a jazz performer?
You know, I think he as a young man, as an American citizen, when he was growing up with his immigrant family around him, he just fell in love with jazz. And his first job, he was a teenager, was as a tune plugger. I don't know if anyone has ever heard that word. A tune plugger on the music street in New York City, where they'd roll the piano out on the sidewalk, and he'd be out there playing all the newest tunes, because people didn't know, should I buy this music? Is it a good piece? He'd play it for them. They'd go into the store and pay for it and buy the sheet music. And he said at a certain point, he was playing all these new tunes, and he said, I could write a better tune than that. So that's what he did. He started writing. And he could write a better tune than that. He became one of the greatest writers. But I guess it was just in his blood. It was around him in New York City. He grew up in a very musical environment, not necessarily family environment, but city environment. And it was a genius.
Is he related to Ira?
Ira is his brother, was his brother, and they collaborated on many things. Ira sometimes writing the words for him and George writing the music. But after Rhapsody in Blue, I mean, with the Concerto in F and the second Rhapsody, that wasn't a one-off. This was a genius. And he had a way of combining jazz and classical that was organic. It never seemed like self-conscious or kind of like didn't quite fit. No, it was his language, and he just did it so naturally.
Dave, the Rhapsody in Blue requires a piano. And,
Check, thank you.
laughing
Yes. Got one.
Because we've had 8 weeks of performances at the Shell. We've had performances where we had an electric piano, but you decided to go with a real piano. Am I correct?
We did an outside performance with a real piano. So a great plug here, opportunity for George over at Piano Planet. Thank you, George. We'll take good care of that piano at the Waikiki Shell. We've got a little tent for it, yeah, you know, there's certain things with having an instrument like that outdoors. A lot of tuning will take place. With that piano. But it certainly was a challenge, and it's something that will, as we look towards next season, and we have plans to be at the Waikiki Shell again next June for a big piano concerto, there's ways around it, you know? This music really deserves to be performed, and again, big orchestrations, so we need the big stage, and I think the Gershwin's gonna land quite nicely outdoors.
Yes. JoAnn, the orchestration for Rhapsody in Blue was actually, he got help from someone else?
He did get some help because he had such little time to write this. I mean, having just read about it in the newspaper, George Whiteman sent over Ferdy Groffet to help. Ferdy was a fantastic orchestrator.
For some Grand Canyon suite?
The one who wrote the Grand Canyon Suite, right? And he actually helped Gershwin orchestrate. Gershwin would be writing the stuff for piano, turning it over to Groffet, who sat right next to him, who then translated it. Of course, Gershwin had final say in that, but he was a very big help and a very talented orchestrator, as people know how great the brass section and the string section sounds in Rhapsody in Blue, and this, of course, the solo clarinet and all the other woodwinds. It's exciting.
Speaking of that solo clarinet, I'm sure you've played it so many times, and I myself also have been in orchestras, and we've done it many times. But sometimes, you know, it's just a simple long glissando from the clarinet solo, and I've been a witness to times when the clarinet player himself or herself sort of has a look, or sometimes words that tell the conductor, just stay on the sideline. Let me just do my gliss.
Yeah,
Have you actually encountered situations where you've had to have discussions about that?
Well, you have to give the clarinetist his space because, or her space, because the gliss is not always predictable. Let me say that. Sometimes it starts slowly and then, accelerandos, or sometimes it's a quick one. Because of the way of doing it, you can't really do it with the fingers. You have to do it simply with your embouchure. So the clarinet is in control there, and the conductor just waits to the top and catches it. So, and it wasn't originally written that way. Gershwin wrote it with the scale. For the clarinet.
For the clarinet.
But and the first performance, the clarinetist in the band was fooling around, and so in the rehearsal he just said, "Rrrr," and Gershwin said, "I like that better," and he changed it, much to the chagrin of clarinetists since then, because it is not an easy thing to do.
So Gershwin, a son of Jewish Russian immigrants, Rachmaninoff eventually became a U.S. citizen, so also an immigrant. And as Dave mentioned, this is, for this summer, really the first substantial piece that really features the orchestra and, in terms of orchestration and time-wise, and we haven't done it for a while. What has been, well, two questions. Can you introduce that piece to us, and what has been your personal experience with this work?
Well, I love this work. This is Rachmaninoff's second symphony out of the three that he wrote. And he wrote it in the beginning of 1907, I think it was, he wrote the piece. It is probably the quintessential romantic symphony. I mean, the most romantic symphony. It's beautiful from the beginning to the end, and it's a long symphony. It unravels in the most beautiful way. And it was very important to Rachmaninoff, who had his first symphony did not get a good response, and he went into a terrible depression. So writing the second symphony was a very big step, and even he wasn't sure if it would be accepted, but it was a big hit.
In fact, he was so affected by the failure of his first symphony that the help that you mentioned was medical?
It was medical, because he became so depressed. It was like a case of writer's block, where he didn't believe in himself anymore, and he was very depressed. And finally he went to a hypnotist, a man called Dr. Nikolai Dahl, who was a cellist, who was an avocational cellist. And he said, "Can you help me? I can't write anymore. I have no confidence." And Dr. Dahl hypnotized him. And he says some mantra in Russian, like, "You will begin to work on your symphony," or concerto. He's writing his concerto at this time. "You will begin to work on your concerto. It will proceed effortlessly, and it will be of great quality." And it worked. He was able to write the second piano concerto. But that was a big help to him. So the second symphony, of course, was another giant step to write that. And it's been beloved from the beginning of its time, on the concert stage. Beautiful solos for so many people, vast melodic fragments of incredible sweeping music, and dark in a way. The Rachmaninoff had, a sort of really Russian personality, and had suffered a lot. He came to the United States because of the revolution, and always longed to go back to Russia. Of course, he was never fated to be able to go back, but in this piece we hear his longing. We hear the fact that he may be writing this, and he was writing this actually in Germany, in Dresden, this piece, but wherever he wrote, he was back in Russia. I mean, his heart was in Russia, his mind was in Russia. It's quintessential Russian romantic music. From the time of Nicholas and Alexandra, if people think of that movie and the kind of Russia of that time, that was Rachmaninoff's Russia.
Dave, you've been immersed in music of the Enlightenment in your previous position with the Haymarket Opera Company in Chicago. So how does it feel to go from the Age of Enlightenment to Russian Romanticism?
Very freeing. A lot more emotion in Rachmaninoff's writing, I would say. You know, I think that that is one of the things about symphonic repertoire is that there's so much that we can reflect in the repertoire choices, and you know, for JoAnn to speak about when this was written and where and all of those influences on this piece, they aren't even things that until right now I was really thinking about as these programs came together. And I think it's that storytelling that's so unique to the work that we do, that is so relatable to everyone.
And I wanted to, JoAnn, I wanted to ask you, or maybe Dave also as well. You mentioned something about 1908.
7 or 8, yeah.
So I read somewhere that it was eventually performed by the Chicago Symphony in 1911. So Dave, you weren't born yet. No, so I guess maybe it's a naive question, but nowadays, you know, you put something, you create something, it's a world premiere, and everyone knows it within 20 seconds because of the internet and everything. But early 1900s, how did people know of someone's work being performed for the first time? Okay, so maybe 3-4 years elapsed between the premiere of Rachmaninoff conducting himself and Chicago Symphony, but was it the radio, was it newspaper? I'm just curious about how the word of mouth around those days. Do we have any guesses?
Well, you know, I have a certain clue about that. You know, Rachmaninoff was still so worried about, would this be good, that he agreed to write it and he agreed to conduct it. But he told the conductor of that orchestra, Solotti, Alexander Solotti, don't tell anyone. Let me just do it and see what it's like. Of course, Solotti didn't listen to him. He told every single music writer in Russia, and they were all there. It was a very big thing, and it was a success. So I imagine through newspapers, Dave, newspapers and word of mouth, letter writing.
Yeah. Well, I think that's such an interesting point to think about, is that, you know, so often we go to the symphony because we want to hear our favorites. We want to hear Beethoven, you know, we want to hear Rachmaninoff. But to think about when these compositions were actually written, people were going to experience these things for the very first time. And, you know, I think we're getting a taste of that with Michael Thomas Fumai this summer. You know, going to hear new works performed by a live symphony orchestra is something you can't replicate. You know, that experience of hearing something for the first time. And I think that's, again, we have such a curious audience. This, like the work that we do, we're around people who are curious and wanting to learn. And, you know, I would love to have been sitting in Chicago in 1911 hearing the Rachmaninoff Symphony for the first time and thinking about how 10, 15 years later my perspective of how that piece would change. And maybe that's the familiarity that we enjoy so much sometimes in this industry.
Yeah, we always have questions about what is trendy or what establishes the trend. 1906-7, so it's very romantic, like you said, but around that time you also had new trends like Stravinsky, Mahler, Schoenberg, and gratefully so, all those trends have sustained the test of time. The Romanticism of Rachmaninoff and the avant-garde of Schoenberg and Stravinsky, those are maybe now can be called classics.
Yes.
But my understanding is at that time when Rachmaninoff premiered, did some critics kind of make the comment that he wasn't evolving as fast as other composers?
You're absolutely right. I mean, I think that generally the audience was swept away by the power of this music, the warmth of the music, the love themes that we hear in this music. But there were some critics who said this is old-fashioned. This music belongs to the 19th century, not the 20th century, because the 20th century, I mean, even with Mahler, was a time of new things. You know, of Stravinsky with a new language, Schoenberg with 12-tone music. So, but Rachmaninoff, I feel that he never tried to defend himself other than to say, I just write what I feel. You know, this is what is in my heart, and I write this. He didn't criticize new music. He didn't apologize for writing romantic music. And you know, Iggy, as he went on in his writing style, we get to like symphonic dances and even the Third Symphony. it's evolved into something much more contemporary, but never lost that sort of being rooted in Romanticism.
So I think you're the perfect guest today because you're kind of closing out our season, but we are also looking ahead at next season. JoAnn and Dave, do you have any teasers for what's coming up in the next few months? Now, of course, Dave, you mentioned that this organization, we're able to adapt and pivot whenever needed. So obviously, this is very important these days. But looking ahead in the next few months, Dave and JoAnn?
Yeah, today, Tuesday, August 10th, was going to be the day that we rolled out our subscriptions. And we're seeing, again, very high case numbers here locally. And there's some concern for the future. We'll use this platform to encourage people to do everything they can to make sure that we can get back to live entertainment, whatever that is for you personally. Our musicians, these organizations, this is our livelihood. And I'm not sure we can all sustain another 15 months without that community of coming together. And so, me personally, this is me begging us all to do what we all individually need to do to get back to these great things in our community. But with that being said, I am so hopelessly optimistic that our season is going to start at the end of October, back indoors, here at the Hawai'i Theater Center, at the Blaisdell, at Kawaiʻau Church, at Maunalua High School. The Hawaii Symphony Orchestra throughout the next 11 months is going to be throughout this community presenting music to our community in many different ways and places. And the Masterwork series will actually start here at the Hawai'i Theater Center the weekend of November 6th and 7th. Scott Yu will be joining the orchestra. For those of you who are PBS fans, you know Scott from Now Hear This in his I think it's his third or fourth season of that production. Scott will be here conducting Firebird and Mio's Creation of the World, and Damari McGill will be joining us in Mozart's Flute Concerto, and that will kick off our Masterwork season, which will we'll get to see JoAnn twice next season. First in January, on January 2nd at the Blaisdell with Joshua Bell.
Long time in coming. He's been wanting to come for a long time. We just couldn't make a date work, but he'll be here on January 2nd.
Yeah. We've now had a few dates with him, and those have changed with the shifting circumstances here. But Josh and Larissa will be joining us on January 2nd at the Blaisdell. Barber Violin Concerto, I believe. Copeland Appalachian Spring is also on that program. And I believe Tower Fanfare for the Uncommon Woman is on that program as well. This is completely off the cuff here. I have to ask about the history of that commission because I was reading about that. Can you tell me a little bit about JoAnn Tower and Joan Tower and?
I'm not sure who commissioned it, but Joan, of course, got her inspiration from Copeland. Copeland, who wrote Fanfare for the Common Man, for the person. This was during World War II, and rather than pay a great tribute to generals or to military people or politicians, he deliberately made this fanfare for every common person who worked to keep our country alive in that time. And Joan was very moved by that, but she wants it to be for women, and she wrote it in the same sort of brass, 3 versions of this piece. And then finally, I'm so glad she did this, she decided to write one for full orchestra. So that's the one we're playing, which I'm excited about. Wonderful.
Yes, and then you will join us to close our Masterwork season in June with Holst the Planets.
At the Shell.
At the Waikiki Shell. So that will actually kick off another Starlight Festival next June into July at the Waikiki Shell. So it'll be the close of the Masterwork and the launch of our Starlight series. The details of that, which will roll out a few months from now. But really nice to have you so many times this season.
I feel very lucky to be conducting in these wonderful places like this theater or Blaisdell or the Shell. So how many orchestras have all these various wonderful places to play?
That's right.
We're very lucky. And some other highlights, overview from the season is Jory Vineker will be joining the symphony to conduct Handel's Messiah here at the Hawai'i Theater Center in December. Tickets are already on sale, actually, for one of our programs at the Blaisdell, Final Fantasy Remake 7. Are you a video gamer, JoAnn?
Not an expert, let me say.
Not an expert. Okay. All right. Well,
You can read books.
You can read
video games.
Yeah,
right?
that is. Well, Final Fantasy VII Remake is just a decades-long trilogy of video game music, and there's some really unique connections to Hawaii here with Final Fantasy. Some of the production was actually done for the video game here in Honolulu. So over the coming months, we're really excited to explore that and to welcome Arnie Roth to the podium. And it is a dynamite performance. Tickets are going to sell out from that. They already are selling very quickly. So if you're interested, join us for that. And then, let's see, Harry Potter, Star Wars, our usual movie series at the Blaisdell. But the rest of the Masterworks will be welcoming some really young, exciting conductors. Dane Lamb is going to be making his United States debut with the Hawaii Symphony Orchestra, a young Australian conductor. And let's see, what else?
We have Anne-Mary McDermott.
Yes,
Yeah.
play conducting.
Conducting.
Yes.
And on that program will be our beloved Lili'ihua Lanzilani, who's been here on this show, is a talented viola player, composer, kind of a polymath and inspiration for many generations to come. JoAnn, you mentioned inspiration talking about Joan Tower, Fanfare for the Uncommon Woman, which I have played in years past. But I just wanted to tell you that the conductors who came here this summer all cite you as a source of inspiration for their successful career. So
I'm very grateful for that. I love when people who are sort of beginning their careers will call me and just want to have a conversation. It's just so lovely to have them reach out and to have me reach out to them too. So thank you.
I remember years ago when your own mentor conducted the Hawaii Symphony, and I, in turn, you're not your offsprings, but the conductors ready to take on your legacy are conducting the.
Well, and there's a lot of young women now, so that's a new thing, and having a chance to interact with them and talk to them and help them means a lot to me.
On one last note, you've had board members of your other orchestra come to Hawaii, but this time you decided maybe you could have offer a little vacation to some of your family members.
Yes, I did. My sister and my brother-in-law are here, dazzled as everyone is when they come. So it'll be a nice week for me, even though I'm working and enjoying being with the symphony, that they'll have some time to explore.
And it's as us, since we're working on stage, is sometimes easy to forget, but that Hawaii is a beautiful place that we should all enjoy safely. Dave?
Certainly is.
Any lasting words?
Yeah, I just would welcome everyone to come join us at the Waikiki Shell this weekend on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday for these performances. We have so much to celebrate with this orchestra and in this community, and I'm just thrilled to have JoAnn on the podium as we close this successful Sheraton Starlight Series. And just a moment of thanks for all of those sponsors who have supported the programs this weekend, especially the Tadauchi Foundation, who will be supporting the performances this Starlight Series 8, and of course for Sheraton Waikiki for their dedicated support of the entire Starlight Series, and especially to the musicians. This has been a wild ride this summer to safely get back to work, and I'm very proud to have led the way for a lot of our industry here in Hawaii to get the full orchestra back on stage, and that should really be celebrated here in this community, that we have such a powerful group of individuals who have come together to make this a success. So Iggy, on behalf of administration, as we're called, management, you call us, I believe.
Reciprocally, we all very much appreciate all the hard, countless hours that you've put in.
Yeah. Great. Well, shall we head over to the shell?
Yes.
All right.
All right.
Well, thank you for joining us for tuning up with Iggy, and looking forward to the next season of Tuning Up. We'll take a few more weeks off here as we get ready for our big season launch. Get your subscriptions. There'll be more flexibility than ever. We want you to feel confident and get your tickets and continue to support the symphony here as we go forward. And yeah, thank you for all your support. Thank you, JoAnn. Thank you, Iggy.
Dave. Thank
and,
you, Iggy.
We'll see you at the Shell this weekend. Mahalo.
Mahalo.